Welcome to Ask a Latina. I'm your host, Terry Beltran. This program is about the opportunity to ask and learn from a Latina trailblazer, with a mission to inspire and motivate Latinas to enter careers where we do not have enough representation. I encourage you also to visit our YouTube channel and our website, askalatina.com. Hello, welcome to Ask a Latina. I'm really excited that you're here, and I have a really wonderful guest in an area that I think is so important for more Latinas to enter. My guest is Areli Hernandez, and she is a dietitian. Areli, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Could you please start with telling us a little bit about yourself, where you were born and growing up?
Yeah, of course. I'm from the border, probably like a 10-minute drive to get into Mexico. That's like how close to the border I grew up. And it was nice as a Mexican American. Growing up, I never felt like a minority because I was just surrounded by a lot of other Hispanic people. And it wasn't until, entering my college years and then moving for jobs and my master's that I really noticed the difference of when you're a minority.
Now that's interesting. You're right. With Texas, that's where you are, right? In Texas?
Mm-hmm.
Or you were born in Texas? So yeah, larger population, of course, all of that. So tell me, when you were growing up, what made you decide? I mean, at what point did you decide to become a dietitian? Or you knew you wanted to be one?
Yeah, I started off college actually as an English major.
Oh,
I really
okay.
liked literature in high school. And as a lot of us do, I gained the freshman 15 and I was learning more about nutrition for myself. And when I was learning more about it, I realized just how much it had to do with anatomy and physiology and chemistry, which were other things I also found interesting. And I realized that career-wise, I was more interested in learning about nutrition than I was seeing myself as, a writer or whatever it is you can do with an English degree. When I learned about, I didn't even know dietitians were a thing, right? When I learned about the existence of dietitians and what they do, that's when I changed my career path.
Oh, wow, that's good. And you said that it was more because of an interest for your own self. And why is that?
Yeah, both in learning about nutrition for myself, but also just the possibilities as far as my career, right? I could work in a hospital, I could work in dialysis, I could work as a professor if I wanted to. I just felt like there was more job opportunities and definitely a big need for Latina dietitians. And there's so few of us out there.
That is so very true. That is so very true. So where did you go to college, and how was the curriculum when you started? And are there any challenges that you had or opportunities? Can you mention that so students know what it's like to go into college for this field?
Yeah. So I did my undergrad at Texas A&M, graduated back in 2012. So it's been a minute. And when I was doing the nutrition, my bachelor's in nutrition, the curriculum was hard, but that's great because you learn so much, like I mentioned, about anatomy, physiology. You have to take organic chemistry, biochemistry. There's just a lot that you basically have to pretty much know most diseases so you know how you can tell a patient to eat for those different diseases. So a lot of medical nutrition therapy. And then my master's I got from Texas Women's here in Houston. And that one was a lot more specialized. And it really opened my eyes to how challenging it is to even have the research that validates the recommendations that we give, right? Because I used to think it was as easy as, they show that blueberries are good for your memory, so eat some blueberries and that'll help your memory. But you have to think about, okay, what studies show that link? How did they show it? At what amount did it show it? Do you have to eat a truckload of blueberries before it makes a difference? So it just, really opens your eyes to like how a lot of it is actually more marketing that you have to protect the patients from, because you hear so many things, right? Like eggs are good for you, eggs are bad for you. But where is that coming from? Who's saying that? What are the pros and cons of those studies? And like, that's why it's just, there's so much that goes into it. So many nuances with even the recommendations and why they change over time, because we get more studies, we get more information. So our recommendations change.
Yeah, I always thought blueberries were good antioxidants, what I hear. But yeah, I think the studies sometimes they tell you you have to have like millions and zillions of something before it really affects you badly. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So a big thing that dietitians have to do is dispel myths and misinformation, because one study back in the 70s showed that, just as an example, that aspartame, or otherwise known as Splenda, right, caused cancer in these rats. Now, for all eternity, all of these artificial sugars have a bad reputation, when if you look at the studies, you'd have to, like you said, have a truckload of Splenda
Yeah.
before it would even have any effects on you.
But I think the FDA did put something on the bags where it says it's possible it could cause cancer.
Yeah, but again, unless you're eating a ton of artificial sugar,
Yeah.
there's a lot more evidence that actual sugar causes cancer than artificial sugar. But again, marketing is a big thing. And now with social media, it's even worse.
Oh, wow. So you get like that too.
Mhm.
Interesting. So you specialized in an area. Which one did you specialize in?
Renal nutrition.
Okay.
So,
And explain to us, some of us that don't know what that means.
so renal has to do with your kidneys. I ended up working. So, one really interesting thing, when I first started as a dietitian, my first job was working at a maximum security prison. So, yeah, so I saw a lot of different things, right? Because at the time I was in North Carolina, and over there, they don't send out, if they have offenders that have cancer or are on dialysis or whatever medical issues they have, they don't send them out to hospitals. They have their own hospital. So all the offenders from the state, if they have a medical issue, they would come to this maximum security prison and stay at that hospital. So since I worked there, I saw every condition you can think of, and one of them was dialysis. And I really liked how heavy it leaned on the patient's laboratory, basically where they're specifically at, before we could make any recommendations. It was just very niche and nuanced and very clinical. So that's what I decided to specialize in. I just recently got my board certification in renal nutrition, but I've been working at a dialysis center for about 5 years now.
That's really important. So this, when you were working there, it was before you went for your master's and decided to go into that?
No,
Or after or during?
I did my master's in a combination program, so it's your internship and your master's at the same time. So once I got my master's, my internship, then you take your registration exam, and then you can be a dietitian, like a practicing dietitian.
Okay. And just like nurses, do you have to like renew your license every year or?
Well, for Texas, your license is every 2 years, but as a profession, your registration is every 5 years.
Okay. So you got to keep up to date to all those things. And
Yeah.
do you take, I know my uncle's a nurse anesthetist and my mother was a registered nurse. So I remember that my mother always still had to get points and things and either go to a conference or sometimes take some courses.
Yeah.
Is that the same for a dietitian?
Yes, you have to do continuing education. And one thing that's helped me a lot, just my job itself, training to work there in a dialysis center gives you so many continuing education credits. And two, I'm involved in LAHIDAN, which is Latinos and Hispanics in Dietetics and Nutrition. And through being involved with them, I end up going to conferences where I also get continuing education.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm so glad you're doing something like that. So you probably know more than me. What is the risks that Latinos have more in having a kidney failure or kidney problem? Is that, I mean, I know that there's diabetes that's really high for Latinos. Does that affect the kidney and that's why they have the problem?
So many different factors, definitely multifactorial, because there's two very common reasons for ending up on dialysis. That's having high blood pressure and having diabetes, both which happen in the Hispanic population. And a lot of it, unfortunately, has to do with, the disparities that we face in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, because when you come from, not that every Hispanic comes from low income, but if you're of Hispanic descent and you don't have the means to go see a doctor, then these issues continue to get worse when they could have been preventable, right? But if you never go to the doctor or you can't afford your medication, then unfortunately things progress worse a lot faster and you end up crashing into dialysis, right? You no longer have a choice. And I have a lot of patients that were not aware that they even had kidney issues. They didn't have the means to, again, go see a doctor or take medications. And that's how they ended up on dialysis.
Oh, wow. So what are
Mhm.
some of the symptoms that they started feeling when to realize that something was wrong?
So when your kidneys stop working, and I'm specifically talking about chronic kidney disease because there's also acute kidney injury, which can happen for a variety of reasons. That one you can recover from. But chronic kidney disease that happens over time, you start building up protein in your blood. You're not filtering out all the things that you should be filtering out. So like your potassium starts elevating, and this can cause changes in taste. So a loss of appetite. You'll notice swelling, so they'll have edema, different fatigue for sure, sometimes weakness. All of those things put together can cause someone to realize that they have issues, or like I mentioned, crash into dialysis. They usually find out that they have kidney issues when they're already in the ER.
Oh my goodness. That's pretty scary. But well, I'm glad that you're as a Latina, you also participate in this organization. Is the organization that you're mentioning that has the conference also doing some studies or trying to do more with our community?
So Lahidan specifically focuses on empowering Latino and Hispanic dietitians to be able to better work with the community, whatever
Okay.
niche that they're in.
Okay.
So only something I feel a lot of people don't know is only 6% of dietitians are Hispanic or Latino. So, but maybe it's close to 20% of the US is Hispanic or Latino. So there's just a big gap in need for
Yeah.
Hispanic
I'm
dietitians.
surprised that it's 6% because overall, I see that dietitian and anything medical falls under STEM, and STEM in general, they say only 2%, maybe 3 at the most.
Hmm.
So I guess the numbers should definitely, I always wonder, I should probably dial in and see how it works by profession. But it's still very low considering our population is still growing and we're the largest and we'll be the majority, not the minority.
Hmm.
And as far as females go versus males, what are the statistics that it's maybe worse for females or no, or it doesn't matter?
Actually, dietetics, it's 80% women. I feel
Wow.
like kind of like nurses and social workers, it's kind of seen as that like healthcare allied role. So you do see a lot of women in the field.
Tell us, okay, so when you graduated, where did you start working and how did you get to where you are today? And we'll talk about that too, what you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I even graduated, because it did take me. So I do want to touch base on this, especially if this is geared towards students. There are a lot of barriers to becoming a dietitian, right? Because not only do you need your bachelor's, but now you also need your master's before you can even sit for the exam. And it's very challenging if you're coming from a lower economic background and like me, like I didn't have a family that could support me through this. So I had to pay for everything myself. And that was cost of living, tuition, housing, and because of that, I had to get a paid internship, and they're pretty rare. Most dietetic internships cost anywhere between like $10,000 or more. So, can you imagine on top of all the costs that you have for your master's and your living expenses to also have to pay an internship just for the privilege of being unpaid labor?
So you had to pay, they didn't pay you.
I got one of the rare paid internships.
Okay, so they
So
did
I
pay you.
went, yes, they paid me, but because it was so hard to get into, it took me, I think, 4 years of just like trying and trying and
Wow.
trying to finally get that internship. And in the meantime, after I graduated from my bachelor's, I was working as a nutritionist for WIC. So that was very helpful as far as learning about women's nutrition, children's nutrition. There is a lot that you work there. And I was also the interpreter for the dietitian that actually saw the patients. So I got a lot of
Great.
exposure there.
Oh, that's great. Oh, wow, that's good. So that sounds interesting. So if you were to go back in time, what would you recommend to yourself back in high school? Maybe something that you would have done differently to prepare for this journey.
Yeah, when I think about it, I'm glad that I did chemistry AP. I probably would have done more science AP classes because I did like English and history and all these other ones. I probably would have done more science AP classes. And two, when I was doing my bachelor's, I would have done more community college courses in the summers, especially because just the level of difficulty for some of these classes and just how long it can take for you to graduate with this major. It would have been a better use of my time. I probably could have graduated early, saved some money if
Yeah,
I had taken courses at a community college that transferred. So that would have probably been one of the things that I would
yeah.
have done differently.
Yeah, I paid my way through college, and that's what I did. I
Hmm.
went through a community college and made sure that all my points would transfer to Michigan State. I was very fortunate to have a really good counselor that was watching everything, and practically everything did. So I ended up being a junior and a senior at Michigan State, and it helped a lot, really, because it was less expensive. It gave me a chance to work part-time and
Hmm.
also transfer, over there. Of course, kind of missed out on all those 2-year freshman fun that everyone had. I was a serious one studying. I didn't really get much fun out there, but it's a little different. I guess even no matter where you are, if you got something serious that you're working on, you don't have much time really
Hmm.
to socialize.
Exactly. And that is something that I brought up because now that I'm a dietitian and my colleagues are dietitians and they're professors that are running internships, I've had discussions with them where we talk about their criteria for scholarships
Mm,
and or even their criteria to let dietitians in or sorry, dietetic students in. And one of the concerns that I raised was that you can't compare someone that comes from financial means with someone who doesn't. Because, for example, my GPA for my bachelor's was horrible, but that's mostly because I had to work 3 different jobs while I was going to school. I didn't have as many hours in the day to study. And that's something you need to take into consideration. Like, yes, maybe their GPA isn't so great, but what's their work history?
hmm.
Is there other skills that would also benefit the internship? And that's something that just kind of like changed their minds on a few things as far as their criteria.
That's really good. I'm glad you did that because it's so
Hmm.
true. I think that people forget that. I mean, it's funny because after you graduate, they all look like, did you volunteer? Where were you? What was your internship? It's a catch-22. Did you get work as well as studying?
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's a very important thing that you did. That's good. I'm glad you did that. So, interesting. So now I just want to touch on your podcast because
Absolutely.
you have a podcast called you go ahead and tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called Food Culture Curious, and the reason I started it was because working in dialysis or just working in healthcare, I kept hearing a lot about how cultural foods are bad. Right? Me specifically working in dialysis, I had doctors and nurses that were telling my patients, you can't have tomatoes, you can't have beans, you can't have, X, Y, and Z, when that's the food they grew up on, that's all they know. And because they wouldn't stop eating their cultural foods, they were labeled as non-compliant. And a big problem with telling a patient, like, you can't have your cultural foods is that one, they're going to be less likely to follow your advice. And two, that's not necessarily what needs to be done, but because nurses and doctors aren't trained in nutrition, for them it's easier to just say, know this, right? Like if they're diabetic, cut out bread, cut out rice, cut out, but a dietitian knows the nutrients that are in the food, and we can tell you how much you can have or how to manipulate the recipe, how to make it work for you and your lifestyle and include those cultural foods. That means so much more than just the nutrients and the calories. Those are our memories. That's our identity. So I started the podcast because I wanted to talk about Latino foods and dialysis and how we can include those. But there's so many other different niches where this is an issue, right?
Right.
So many diabetic patients that have heard, well, my doctor said no more tortillas. My doctor said no more rice. And that's not necessarily what you need to do, and it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I started talking to dietitians of different niches, whether that's diabetes, GI issues, eating disorders, and learning more about different cultures. So I've had a variety of different cultural backgrounds on the show, and they'll talk about their foods, their holidays, what's meaningful to them, and how to work with these populations, right? What are some things that we need to keep in mind when working with, for example, someone from Pakistan, right? Well, we have to keep in mind, hey, Ramadan is coming up. That might affect how they're eating. Or like you heard with my interview with the dietitian that was from Cuba, food scarcity changes how you eat for the rest of your life. And that can also lead to health issues. So just so many different topics that I feel are important, especially since I mentioned a majority of dietitians are Caucasian. So they don't have that insight to cultural foods
Yeah.
that we do. And that's why I started it.
I think it's really great because even within our Hispanic community, because I do multicultural marketing in the Hispanic market, and we're all different. You know, my family
Yeah.
came from Bolivia. We don't have tortillas or anything like that. We eat more potatoes, a lot more. There's
Yes.
400 different varieties of potatoes because of the Andes Mountains, and they're very good, nutritious. I guess the Andes, the Incas invented the dehydration of the potato. So we have chuño, which is kind of a lot more nutrients in it because it's dehydrated and how it's made. So it's a lot of interesting things about it. But then I also remember when you said tortilla, I thought Venezolanos have the arepas.
Yeah.
And I wondered, is that kind of like the tortilla, the same situation there? Because it's a little bit of a different flour, I think, or maybe similar, but maybe the way it's done. So even the way you cook it must make a big difference.
Yes, exactly. And I had a dietitian from Bolivia, and she talked a lot about like potatoes and quinoa and
I have
just,
to listen to that.
different starches that you're used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. My mother would not eat anything without potato. She's like, oh, I had to have a potato. And I'm like, okay, all right. And so when I went to Bolivia, that's when I'm like, oh my God, all these different potatoes, different colors. They were kind of fun to look at because they're purple and they're orange, different kinds. So I had no idea about that. And then the process of dehydrating the chuño, I don't know if she talked about that or not, but that was kind of interesting too. And my uncle, being a nurse anesthetist, knows all these details. And he would talk about how the nutrients and how better that was. I was like, I'm lost on that one, but okay, I'll eat it. So I'll have to listen to that episode. I totally think this is great that you're doing that. And you're also reaching out to other dietitians from different cultures and bringing them in. I love that. That is awesome.
Well, I don't remember the number of the episode, but it's called Witchcraft or Functional Medicine.
Okay.
Because my friend was talking about how a lot of things that, work as functional medicine are considered witchcraft. Because she goes into it. It's really interesting.
I have to find out what part of Bolivia she's from. But that's pretty cool. Interesting. So where are you located now? And did you get a chance to travel to other states while you had internships or different things? Did you get to go different places or was it all in Texas?
Most of it was in Texas because I'm from the border, and then I went to A&M, and then Houston was my master's. But I did work in North Carolina for a few years, and now I'm back in Houston.
Okay. Well, that's good. So back home, closer to home, family and everything. Well, thank you so much, Areli. I really enjoyed this. I think it's a very important topic. And like you said, there's not enough Latinas in it. We need to encourage them more. And I hope that as they listen to you, it's always good. I'm glad you mentioned about the high school, as far as being able to get those credits. The AP courses are so important today. And I think they make a big difference in planning ahead. So I think it's very much needed. We need more Latinas out there because our community needs us. So this concludes our interview with Asa Latina. Thanks for joining us, and I hope that you join us at the next one.